There is a moment, subtle yet seismic, when the balance within a relationship with a narcissistic individual begins to shift. It is not announced by argument or explosion. It is felt through silence, the silence that follows when you stop reacting, when you stop explaining, defending, or justifying yourself. Something fundamental begins to crumble within the narcissist's psyche. What begins to erode in that moment is not your strength, but theirs. This is what can be called the erosion of power. For a narcissist, power is not about genuine influence. It's about emotional control. They thrive on extracting reactions from others, feeding off the energy of those who respond to their provocations, manipulation, and emotional traps. Each time you defend yourself, protest against an unfair accusation, or try to make them understand your point of view, they absorb your emotional energy as proof of their importance. Your reaction confirms their illusion that they matter more, that they can dictate the emotional temperature of your world. They crave that sense of dominance because beneath it lies an unbearable truth they cannot face, the emptiness of their own identity. But when you stop reacting, when you no longer play the emotional tug of war, that illusion begins to dissolve. Suddenly, they no longer feel seen, heard, or significant. The mirror that once reflected their inflated self, image is gone, and they are forced to confront the void they've spent their entire life escaping. This is why your silence feels like violence to them. It's not indifference, it's annihilation. The narcissist's entire sense of power is built upon external validation and without your emotional engagement. They lose their supply. It's like pulling the plug from a machine that has been running on stolen energy. At first, they will not understand what has changed. They will test you with small provocations, subtle comments, or dismissive gestures to gauge your reaction. When none comes, confusion sets in. They begin to feel the loss of control like oxygen leaving a sealed room. Panic hides behind a calm exterior. They may begin to question themselves, not out of introspection, but out of fear that their grip on you is slipping. The erosion of their power is gradual, like a tide pulling away from the shore. Every day that you remain detached, the illusion they built begins to crack a little more. They might start to alternate between charm and cruelty. One moment affectionate, the next dismissive. They are trying to find the emotional key that used to unlock your reaction. But the truth is, once awareness has taken root in you, their tricks no longer work the same way. You begin to see the cycle for what it truly is. A desperate attempt to preserve a false sense of superiority. You begin to understand that your reaction was never about connection, it was about control. And as you detach, you are not being cruel, you are reclaiming your emotional autonomy. The narcissist, however, interprets this differently. They see your calm as defiance, your silence as rebellion, your indifference as an insult. They cannot comprehend peace without power, love without control, connection without dominance. To them, if they are not at the center, they cease to exist. So they double down. They intensify their tactics, shift strategies, or even play the victim, hoping to pull you back into the familiar emotional battlefield. But what they fail to realize is that the erosion of their power is not a single event. It is a process of awakening, a slow but irreversible unraveling of the psychological hold they once had. As their power erodes, something within you begins to rise. You start to remember what it feels like to exist without being constantly measured, compared, or corrected. the fog begins to lift, and you start to see how much of your energy was being siphoned into their endless need for validation. You begin to rebuild your inner boundaries, the invisible lines that were blurred by years of emotional manipulation. You start to understand that peace is not found in pleasing others, but in staying grounded in your own truth. The narcissist erosion of power is not just their downfall, it's your emergence. Yet this erosion is not without turbulence. Narcissists sense the shift instinctively, much like an addict sensing withdrawal. They might try to provoke you into old patterns, using nostalgia, guilt, or fear as tools. They might say, "You've changed," as if growth were a crime. They might accuse you of being heartless or detached. What they are really saying is, "You no longer feed me." Their perception of love is inverted. They see control as care and domination as connection. So when you stop reacting, it feels to them as though love has died, when in truth manipulation has. The erosion of their power reveals how fragile that power always was. It was never built on strength. It was built on your emotional labor, your empathy, your willingness to fix, explain, and forgive. Without your reaction, the structure collapses under its own weight. This realization terrifies them because it exposes their dependency. The narcissist, who once appeared so confident and in control, now stands trembling before the emptiness they tried to hide from the world. And so the erosion continues. Every time you choose silence over defense, composure over chaos, self-respect over appeasement, another layer of their illusion peels away. They begin to sense that you no longer orbit around their moods, and the power dynamic that once felt unshakable begins to disintegrate. It is in this erosion that the truth emerges, not just about them, but about you. You begin to see that your worth was never something they could give or take away. It was always there, waiting beneath the noise of their projections. And as their control fades, what remains is not loss, but liberation. At the core of every narcissist lies an emptiness so vast that it demands constant external feeding to feel whole. It is an emotional hunger that never ceases, a need for validation that cannot be satisfied, no matter how much admiration, attention, or approval they receive. This hunger is not rooted in arrogance, it is rooted in absence. Beneath the mask of confidence and superiority hides a deep, gnawing insecurity, an unhealed wound formed long before they met you. Every interaction, every manipulation, every act of control is simply a means to secure one more drop of validation, to momentarily quiet the echo of that emptiness. When you stop reacting, you cut off their supply. And in that silence, their desperation for validation begins to surface in its rawest form. Validation for a narcissist is not a luxury, it's oxygen. They rely on it to maintain the illusion of self-importance, to sustain the fragile construct of the identity they have built. Without validation, the false self they present to the world begins to crumble. The compliments, the admiration, the emotional reactions, these are not simple desires for attention. They are survival mechanisms. The narcissist's sense of identity does not come from within. It is entirely dependent on the reflection they receive from others. They do not truly know who they are unless someone else tells them. Their existence is mirrored, not lived. When you are emotionally engaged, arguing, explaining, defending, they felt powerful. Each reaction confirmed that they mattered, that they had influence, that they could stir emotion within you. You were their mirror, reflecting their significance. But when you detach, When you stop responding to their provocations, that reflection disappears. The silence becomes unbearable. Without your emotional participation, they are forced to confront a reality they have avoided their entire life. That their sense of worth was never real, it was borrowed. Now, the source of that borrowed identity has gone quiet. The desperation for validation doesn't always show itself through obvious pleas for attention. Sometimes it disguises itself as rage, sarcasm, or indifference. The narcissist might mock your calmness or accuse you of thinking you're better than them. These accusations are not about you. They are projections of their inner turmoil. What they are truly saying is, why don't you see me anymore? They need your reaction, even if it's anger, because your emotional energy reassures them that they still matter. It validates their existence. To a narcissist, love and attention are interchangeable with control and reaction. Without them, they feel erased. When their validation supply runs dry, the narcissist often becomes erratic. They may swing between charm and cruelty, trying to test which version of themselves will bring you back. One moment, they might suddenly appear vulnerable, apologetic, remorseful, even tearful. They might say all the right things, mirroring your language of healing and introspection. But this too is part of the performance. Their vulnerability is rarely genuine. It is a tactic, a calculated move to regain access to your emotional world. They sense that their usual methods of dominance no longer work, so they resort to mimicry, the imitation of authenticity, to elicit sympathy and attention. In their mind, validation in any form is better than being ignored. And if empathy doesn't bring you back, they may escalate to aggression. They might provoke you, insult you, or create conflict just to force a reaction. They will push every emotional button they know until they see a crack in your calmness. Because that single moment of reaction tells them they still have influence. It reassures them that they are not invisible. This is the paradox of the narcissist's validation. What they crave most is proof that they matter, even if it comes through pain and chaos. Peace terrifies them because peace means distance. Silence means insignificance. Their desperation can become all-consuming. When they no longer receive validation from you, they will begin seeking it elsewhere, with friends, workers, social media followers, or even strangers. They need an audience to feed on, a reflection to confirm their existence. They may fabricate stories, exaggerate achievements, or present themselves as victims to gain sympathy. It doesn't matter whether the attention is positive or negative, admiration or pity. To them, all attention is fuel. The more they are seen, the more they can avoid seeing themselves. But the cycle never ends because no amount of external validation can fill the void of self-abandonment. This desperation stems from a fundamental truth that the narcissist refuses to face. Their identity was never built on authenticity, but on performance. Every trait they project, confidence, intelligence, superiority, is a mask designed to win approval. They have spent so long pretending to be what others admire that they have lost touch with who they truly are beneath the facade. So when validation is withdrawn, when you stop reacting, they are forced to confront the terrifying question they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Who am I without admiration? Who am I when no one is watching? The silence you create becomes a mirror they cannot control. It reflects not admiration, but absence, not attention, but emptiness. It shows them the cracks in the persona they have built, And this realization triggers panic. Their escalating behavior is not born out of confidence, but out of fear. Fear of being unimportant, unseen, unworthy. The same fear that once drove them to charm and manipulate others now drives them to anger and desperation. Every attempt to pull you back is an attempt to silence that fear by making you feel something, anything, for them again. And yet, no matter how much validation they extract, it never lasts. The moment they receive attention, they begin to crave more. Like a vessel with no bottom, they cannot retain the emotional nourishment they demand. The praise evaporates, the admiration fades, and they are once again left starving. This is why the narcissist's relationships are filled with cycles of intensity and depletion, idealization followed by devaluation, affection followed by rejection. They are forever chasing a feeling that cannot be sustained because it is built on illusion rather than authenticity. When you stop reacting, you interrupt that cycle. You remove yourself from their endless search for validation, and in doing so, you reveal how dependent they truly are on others for a sense of self. The desperation that follows is not about losing you. It's about losing the mirror that kept them from seeing the truth. You were not just a person in their life. You were a reflection of the image they wanted to believe in. When that reflection fades, they are left with the one thing they fear most, themselves. There is a psychological mechanism that the narcissist wields with precision, often without conscious awareness, yet with devastating effect. It is the act of projection, the subtle art of assigning their own inner chaos, shame, and insecurity onto someone else so they can continue to believe in their own perfection. This is what creates the projection trap. It is not just manipulation, it is a survival strategy. By making you carry what they refuse to face, the narcissist maintains their illusion of superiority. You become the vessel for their denied emotions, the mirror onto which they cast their unwanted truths. In this way, they stay clean by making you feel dirty, stay strong by making you feel weak, stay innocent by making you feel guilty. To understand the projection trap, you must first recognize that narcissists are deeply fragmented. Their outer self, the mask they show to the world, is built on an idealized image, charming, confident, intelligent, or powerful. But beneath that mask lies a fragile, wounded core that is filled with fear, inadequacy, and shame. These inner wounds are unbearable to acknowledge. They contradict the image they've worked so hard to project. So instead of facing them, the narcissist pushes them outward. They assign their own flaws, motives, and emotions to those around them, especially to the ones closest to them. This is why the more you care, the more you become their target. You are not seen as a partner. You are seen as a psychological dumping ground. The process happens subtly at first. Perhaps they accuse you of being selfish when you set a boundary, or of being controlling when you simply ask for honesty. Maybe they call you too sensitive after they've hurt you, or ungrateful when you stop giving. In those moments, what they are really describing is themselves. They are labeling you with the very traits that live within them, but cannot be admitted. By projecting these qualities onto you, they create a distorted reality where they remain blameless, and you carry the burden of everything they refuse to own. The more you react to defend yourself, the more convinced they become that their projection is true. This is how the trap tightens. It is called a trap because projection lures you into playing a role that was never yours. When someone accuses you of something untrue, the natural impulse is to explain, to justify, to prove your innocence. But with a narcissist, every attempt to clarify only deepens their control. Your explanations become fuel for their narrative. The more you try to convince them that you are not what they say you are, the more they twist your words as proof that you are defensive, unstable, or manipulative. The trap is not in their accusation, it's in your reaction. The moment you engage, you validate their illusion, you begin to doubt yourself, wondering if you really are the one causing the problem. Slowly, their projections begin to shape your identity. You start carrying the emotional weight that belongs to them. A projection allows the narcissist to maintain emotional dominance without ever taking accountability. It gives them a false sense of moral superiority while keeping you in a perpetual state of confusion. They weaponize your empathy, knowing that you will introspect, question your own behavior, and strive to fix what's wrong. They rely on your self-awareness to avoid developing their own. The narcissist's greatest manipulation is not in convincing others they are right. It is in convincing you that you are wrong. Once you begin to internalize their projections, you start living under their emotional shadow. In relationships, the projection trap becomes the invisible cage that keeps you tethered to them. They may accuse you of betrayal when they are the ones being unfaithful. They may call you emotionally unavailable when they are the ones withholding affection. They may label you as dramatic or unstable after deliberately creating chaos to provoke you. It's a cruel inversion of truth, a psychological mirroring designed to make you question your own perception of reality. Over time, this leads to emotional exhaustion. You begin to lose the ability to distinguish between who you truly are and who they say you are. What makes the projection trap so insidious is that it operates beneath awareness. Narcissists don't often sit and plan to project. It is instinctive. Their psyche is structured to reject vulnerability. To admit fault would mean shattering their carefully constructed self-image, and that would be intolerable. So projection becomes their subconscious defense mechanism, a way to stay safe from the truth. And yet, in protecting themselves, they destroy the emotional stability of those around them. The relationship becomes a psychological battlefield where the narcissist fights to avoid self-reflection, and you fight to reclaim your sanity. Breaking free from the projection trap requires a shift in understanding. It begins with realizing that their accusations are confessions in disguise. When they call you selfish, they are revealing their own self-centeredness. When they say you don't care, they are exposing their emotional emptiness. When they accuse you of a manipulation, they are describing their own tactics. Every projection is a mirror turned outward, a reflection of their inner world displaced onto you. The trap works only if you accept their version of reality as truth. The moment you begin to see the pattern, their power weakens. The projection trap also explains why communication with a narcissist feels circular and futile. You can spend hours explaining your intentions, expressing your feelings, or trying to clarify misunderstandings, yet the conversation always ends in blame. They are not listening to understand. They are listening to deflect. Their goal is not resolution, but reassertion of superiority. In their mind, admitting fault is death to the ego, and so they twist logic until you become the scapegoat. They live in a psychological world where the mirror must always point away from them. If they are angry, it's because you provoked them. If they are distant, it's because you failed them. If they lie, it's because you drove them to it. The story is always rewritten to protect their fragile self-concept. The projection trap keeps you emotionally entangled because it triggers your need to restore fairness and truth. You want to be understood, to be seen accurately. But in the narcissist world, truth is irrelevant. Only control matters. They distort reality not to convince you of the facts, but to keep you emotionally engaged in the cycle of defense and justification. The more you try to correct their narrative, the deeper you sink into it. It is a psychological quicksand where every movement to free yourself pulls you further in. Only through awareness can the dynamic begin to unravel, because projection loses its power the moment you stop accepting ownership of what was never yours. When a narcissist senses that their control over you is slipping, that your emotional attachment is weakening and your reactions are fading, they enter the stage of what can be called the grand finale manipulation. It is their last, most desperate attempt to pull you back into the cycle, to reclaim the psychological dominance they once held over your emotions. This stage is not born of love or regret, it is born of fear. The narcissist's greatest terror is not your absence. It is your indifference. Indifference signifies that you have stepped out of their illusion, that their power has collapsed, and that their emotional leverage no longer exists. To a narcissist, that is ego death. And to avoid it, they will orchestrate one final act of manipulation that feels intense, confusing, and emotionally charged. The grand finale manipulation is a performance, a calculated production designed to evoke reaction. It often appears in two contrasting forms, either an explosion of chaos or an outpouring of sudden tenderness. Both serve the same purpose: to provoke emotion, to make you feel, to make you respond. Because in the narcissist's mind, if you are still reacting, you are still theirs. The specific form it takes depends on the kind of response they believe will work best. Some narcissists will use rage, conflict, and accusations to trigger guilt or fear. Others will use vulnerability, affection, and promises to reawaken your empathy. The goal is not reconciliation or understanding, it is reactivation. They want your emotional energy back, because without it, their identity feels as if it's collapsing. When they sense that their old tactics, blame, gaslighting, or silent treatment, no longer produce the same results, they elevate their performance. They may suddenly become reflective, admitting to mistakes in ways that sound sincere. They might tell you they've changed, that they finally understand how much they've hurt you. They might use the language of healing, the words you've longed to hear, the gestures you once begged for. But what makes it manipulation is not the act itself, it's the timing. They do it only when they sense you are emotionally detaching. Their new-found vulnerability is not a revelation, it's a reaction. It is the last weapon in their arsenal to restore the emotional bond that kept you under their control. For others, the grand finale takes the opposite form: rage and destruction. If affection doesn't bring you back, they'll attempt to dominate you through chaos. They may start arguments out of nowhere, spread rumors, or twist reality to make you doubt your perception. They might accuse you of betrayal, call you cold, or tell others that you were the toxic one. Their rage is not hatred, it's panic disguised as power. They would rather destroy the connection than face the reality of losing control. In their world, control is the only proof of worth. So, when you stop feeding their ego, they turn to emotional arson. If they can't have your love, they will settle for your pain, because both validate their significance. This stage often confuses the one on the receiving end. After all the cruelty, gaslighting, and devaluation, the sudden display of affection or remorse can feel like a breakthrough. It seems like they've finally seen the damage they caused. The promises sound heartfelt, the apologies sound real. But it's important to understand that what drives these gestures is not transformation, it's desperation. The narcissist's need for validation has reached its climax. They will say anything, do anything, and become anyone if it means they can reattach to your emotions. It's not love they seek, it's control disguised as connection. The grand final manipulation is also when the narcissist's mask begins to fracture under pressure. Their usual composure gives way to erratic behavior. They oscillate between pleading and threatening, between love, bombing and blame, shifting between tears and accusations. This emotional whiplash is deliberate. It's meant to destabilize your clarity, to make you second guess your decision to detach. They want you to feel conflicted, to doubt your own judgment, to wonder if you're being too harsh, to feel pity for their supposed suffering. They understand that confusion is control. When you are torn between empathy and exhaustion, they have you exactly where they want you, still emotionally engaged. Another form of the grand final manipulation is the fake healing narrative. This is when the narcissist pretends to go on a journey of self-awareness. They may claim to be in therapy, reading books about personal growth, or working on their trauma. They might even use the language of spirituality, talking about karma, inner peace, or energy healing. But underneath, there is no genuine transformation. There is only performance. Their sudden growth conveniently appears at the moment they feel you slipping away and disappears once they regain control. It's an illusion of progress crafted to make you stay just a little longer, to reignite the hope that maybe this time they've changed. The grand final manipulation also extends to others around you. If they realize they can no longer manipulate you directly, they may turn to your friends, family, or colleagues to influence your emotions indirectly. They might play the victim, telling others how cold or unfair you've become. They may rewrite history, painting themselves as the misunderstood one, and you as the unstable or cruel partner. This social manipulation serves two purposes: to protect their image and to provoke you into defending yourself. Because every time you try to clarify, every time you respond, you are still in the game. Silence to them is defeat. Reaction in any form is victory. The grand finale is their last attempt to reassert their script. They cannot bear to end the story without control over the narrative. If they can't pull you back emotionally, they will try to shape how others see you or how you see yourself. They may even stage an act of finality, disappearing abruptly, or blocking communication, or pretending they've moved on faster than you. But these gestures are not closure. They are designed to leave you unsettled, to keep a thread of confusion alive, so that, in time, they can return when your guard is down. The disappearance is never real. It's simply the quiet before the next attempt. The grand final manipulation is not about the end. It's about survival. It is the narcissist's last effort to preserve the illusion of control in a world where they are rapidly losing their power. Their fear of emotional irrelevance drives them to extreme behaviors that seem contradictory, but each act has the same motive: to make you feel again, to make you respond again, to make you return to the emotional orbit they have built around you. There comes a quiet, almost imperceptible moment after the storm, a moment when the chaos that once consumed your emotions begins to lose its grip. It's not marked by fireworks or loud realizations, but by stillness. This is the beginning of what can be called the awakening of true power. It is the phase that follows the collapse of illusion, when you've stopped reacting to manipulation, when you've seen through projection, when the old emotional patterns no longer move you the way they once did. It is the return of your inner authority, the silent reclaiming of the self that was once buried beneath confusion, fear, and emotional dependency. For so long, you were conditioned to believe that your peace depended on someone else's approval, that love meant sacrifice, and that understanding meant enduring pain. You were drawn into emotional dynamics where your energy was siphoned in exchange for fleeting moments of validation. But as the manipulation begins to unravel, you start to see that power was never something they took from you. It was something you gave away unconsciously, piece by piece. Every time you prioritized their comfort over your truth, the awakening begins the moment you stop doing that. It begins when you no longer seek closure from the very source of your pain, when you no longer explain your worth to those committed to misunderstanding it. The awakening of true power is not about retaliation or proving superiority. It is the realization that you don't need to fight for recognition or beg for respect. You begin to understand that silence can be more powerful than confrontation, that detachment can be more transformative than revenge. True power doesn't shout, it radiates. It doesn't chase validation, it emanates self-respect. When you reach this stage, you begin to move differently. The same words that once triggered you now sound hollow. The same tactics that once confused you now appear transparent. You begin to see manipulation for what it is, a desperate attempt to control what cannot be controlled, your awareness. In this state, you no longer interpret someone's cruelty as a reflection of your worth. You begin to see their behavior as an expression of their own unresolved wounds. This is not to excuse the pain they caused, but to understand that their power over you was built on illusion. Every time they projected, provoked, or guilt-tripped you, it only worked because it met a place inside you that still doubted your own value. The awakening of true power happens when that doubt dissolves. When you stop needing to prove that you're good enough, when you stop chasing validation that should have been freely given, you step out of the psychological game entirely. You become what the narcissist fears most, emotionally untouchable. This awakening is not sudden, it unfolds slowly, like dawn after a long night. It begins with awareness, but it deepens with detachment. Detachment does not mean apathy, it means no longer allowing someone else's chaos to dictate your peace. You stop explaining yourself to those who are committed to distortion. You stop trying to heal people who refuse to see their wounds. You stop seeking empathy from those who weaponize it against you. And in that withdrawal of energy, something extraordinary happens. The same energy that was once scattered across endless emotional battles begins to return to you. You start to feel your own essence again, the calm, grounded sense of self that had been overshadowed by constant reactivity. As your energy returns, clarity emerges. You begin to see patterns, not only in others but in yourself. You recognize how your empathy was exploited, how your compassion was manipulated into compliance. You see how your desire to understand was used against you. But instead of judging yourself, you start to appreciate the wisdom gained through that experience. Every wound becomes a teacher, every disappointment a revelation. This is the essence of the awakening. It transforms pain into awareness. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstance and begin to recognize yourself as a participant in your own evolution. The very experiences that once broke you now become the foundation of your resilience. The awakening of true power is not about becoming harder, it's about becoming clearer. You realize that softness and strength can coexist. You can have compassion without surrendering boundaries. You can love deeply without losing yourself. You can forgive without granting access. Power, in its truest form, is not control, it's freedom. Freedom from the need to be understood by everyone. Freedom from the compulsion to fix what you didn't break. Freedom from the endless cycle of emotional dependency that keeps people chained to their past. When you begin to embody this freedom, you no longer fear being alone. Solitude becomes sanctuary, not punishment. Silence becomes a friend, not a void. In this awakened state, you begin to attract differently. The relationships that once felt magnetic now feel heavy. The dynamics that once seemed normal now feel toxic. You start to sense energy before words, intention before action. You no longer confuse attention with love, intensity with intimacy, or control with care. You begin to align with those who speak the language of authenticity rather than manipulation. This shift is not about superiority, it's about vibration. You are no longer operating from survival. You are operating from self-awareness. And in that shift, everything changes. The awakening also brings a new kind of strength, the strength to let go. Letting go of the need for closure, of the fantasy that they'll change, of the guilt that was never yours to carry. You begin to understand that letting go is not abandonment, it is self-respect in motion. The people and situations that fall away during this time are not losses, they are clearings. Each one makes space for something more aligned with your truth. The same heart that once broke under manipulation begins to open again, not out of naivety, but out of wisdom. You trust differently now, not blindly, but consciously. You love differently now, not to be needed, but to be free. The awakening of true power is the recognition that peace was never something you had to earn. It was something you had to reclaim. It was always there, beneath the noise, waiting for you to stop reacting, to stop explaining, to stop shrinking. It waited for the day you'd realize that you were never powerless, only conditioned to believe that you were. And when that realization dawns, the world doesn't necessarily change, but your relationship to it does. The same challenges remain, but you meet them from a place of inner authority rather than fear. You no longer respond from woundedness, but from awareness. You no longer seek validation because you have become the source of it yourself.